What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Unique Experience. Today I'm going to share with you my newest project. If you're new to the channel, my name is John, and my personal goal is to own and experience as many unique cars as possible. If you're already subscribed, thanks again for tuning in. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my newest project that I replaced the 2007 Aston Martin V8 Vantage with. This is my 2008 Bentley Continental GT. So for those who are wondering how I kind of came to this car, well, you know, growing up, I always remember watching MTV Cribs, and I remember always seeing, you know, these really successful people driving these cars around. For those who follow my channel, you know that aesthetics are very important to me. So, you know, I think that it's a very good looking car, even though some people seem to purchase them maybe as status symbols or, you know, something like that. But I always really liked the way the Continental GT looked, the coupe, not the GTC, which is the convertible. The Flying Spurs are nice too. That's the sedan version. I just like the two-door coupe. It's a big coupe. So after I sold the Aston Vantage V8, I was in the market for unique cars that I had never owned before, and I narrowed it down to three. It was a 2015 Mercedes-Benz S63 AMG Coupe, a 2015 Audi RS7, or a 2008 and up Bentley Continental GT. While I really like the 2015 S63 AMG Coupe, and I think that the 2015 RS7, they're both very nice cars, it reminds me of my M4. For those who have followed the channel, you know I had a 2016 BMW M4 earlier this year in Tanzanite Blue on Nutmeg, modified car. It was an amazing car. I mean, it's modern, it's comfortable, tons of technology, great power. I mean, pretty much anything that you could want in a car, but they weren't necessarily unique. My definition of unique is just something that's uncommon, something that you don't see often. You know, in this particular case, this is a car that retailed for over 200,000 new, and now you can buy it for a fraction of the price. That is unique for me. And in addition to that, I always like to make my changes and my modifications to the cars to kind of make it my own and make it stand out just that much more. So I pretty much decided, you know, that I definitely wanted a Bentley GT, and once I decided I wanted that, I went to a local dealership. They had a white 08 that had like this brown interior, and the only thing I really didn't like about it aesthetically was it had the Mulliner wheels, but they were chrome, and I'm not a huge chrome guy, but I wanted to drive it just to kind of make sure that, you know, the Bentley is definitely what I want. So drove to the dealership, and after driving it, I really liked it. It was extremely smooth, very quiet, and just a very, very nice, comfortable ride. So at that point, I decided I definitely wanted a Continental GT. That particular one had some things that were wrong with it, so I didn't want that particular car. But then I started my search for the right one. You may or may not be surprised how challenging that was. For example, you know, kind of finding the right spec was definitely a bit difficult. So, for example, I found a really nice powder blue Continental GT. It was a very nice metallic light blue. The exterior paint looked great, but on the interior, it looked like a blue bomb went off. So, the steering wheel, the seats, the seatbelt buckle, everything was this dark navy blue. And while I'm sure there's someone out there for that vehicle, it was a bit much for me, and I wanted more of a conservative color combination. So one of the things that I definitely wanted to have is I really like the look of the GT Speed front bumper. So for those who aren't familiar with, you know, Bentley Continental GT Speeds, or just a Continental GT, regular Continental GT, the Continental GT is more, you know, just luxury, you know, so you often have like wood trim and things of that nature, whereas the GT Speed is more sports oriented, so your interior trim colors might be you know, like a piano black or a carbon fiber or brushed aluminum, something along those lines. But aesthetically on the outside, it does have like vents in the hoods, and then the front bumper style is different than your standard Continental GT. Preferably I would have liked to have, you know, that front, and I definitely wanted the Mulliner package. So the Mulliner package for this car is pretty much the diamond stitching that's in the front and rear seats, and also it's the sport pedals. Also, this particular car was spec'd with the Bentley lettering embossed into the leather, into the seat, which was really nice. But you know, I definitely wanted, you know, a conservative color combination, and I wanted the Mulliner package. So I narrowed it down to 2 Continental GTs in my search. There was a dealership in Oregon and a dealership in Atlanta. Now the dealership in Oregon had a 2000, I believe it was a 2008? It was 2008, or maybe it was 2010, but it was a GT Speed. As I mentioned, the GT Speed has more options and things geared towards, you know, more of a sporty ride. So, you know, it has that piano black trim. The steering wheel is also different. It has like a tri-spoke steering wheel, which is a little more sportier looking. And then also it has more power. So the GT Speed has 600 horsepower versus the standard Continental GT having 550. I really like that car, but because both of these dealerships were a little further than I would like to drive, I'm here in Maryland, you know, I was intending to buy the car sight unseen. So there are very specific questions and things that I ask for when I'm, you know, looking for a car. Unfortunately, the dealership in Oregon that had the GT Speed did not make me feel comfortable enough to commit to the car without going out to see it. So reached out to the dealership in Atlanta, and the sales guy did a great job as far as conveying the information back to me that I had asked for, sending tons of videos and photos, and just very accommodating. So he made me feel comfortable enough to move forward with the car. Even though it wasn't a GT Speed that I necessarily really wanted, it was still a very nice spec. So it was Monday morning, I did a wire for the car. Monday afternoon, I had an enclosed trailer pick it up, and you know, it got delivered to me. So once it arrived, you know, I looked over the car. Everything pretty much checked out as I thought it was, and basically I went out for a drive with my wife, and driving around, you know, low speeds around town was fine. And then when I got on the highway, I did go wide open throttle. And at wide open throttle, I noticed that high RPMs, it started to break up a little bit, and the check engine light started flashing, but then it went away. So got it home, plugged up my OBD2 scanner, and it turns out there were 3 misfires that pulled up, which is completely fine, because prior to committing to the car, I always recommend doing your due diligence, right? Know what you're getting yourself into. So from looking at the service history, you know, I had a pretty good idea of what had been done, what hadn't been done. And one of the things that hadn't been done is the coils and the plugs. I mean, the car currently has 84,000 miles on it. When I got it, I believe it had 82,000 miles. So it didn't have, you know, at that mileage, you know, I would expect that to be replaced. I didn't think it would happen right away, but it is what it is. It's the nature of the beast when you're buying a used car. So I do believe in preventative maintenance. So I took it to my local independent shop. Had all 12 ignition coils replaced, all 12 spark plugs, an oil change, and I also replaced the intake manifold gasket, just because the intake manifold does have to be removed in order to access the coils in your plug. So after that, it seemed to be pretty solid. This particular car, just to kind of go over, I guess, the details and the options. It is a 2008 Bentley Continental GT. It currently has, as I mentioned, 84,000 miles on it. It has the Mulliner package, and it actually has carbon ceramic brakes as well. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with carbon ceramic brakes, the material of the carbon ceramics with proper use should outlast the car. I mean, it's a very it's not like your standard steel brakes that you're constantly, replacing and pads every, so often. With the rotors, it should outlast the car with proper use. All you do is you just replace the brake pads. Now, they are a bit squeaky if you don't get them heated up and really jam on them to warm them up. They are squeaky, but they stop very, very well. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with carbon ceramic brakes, I am relatively new to them as well. I've never really owned a car that had carbon ceramic brakes before, and like everything, it has its pros and its cons. So the pro is that with proper use, not proper use, but I'd say kind of standard use of your brakes, not tracking it and braking heavy everywhere you go, they should outlast the car. You just replace the pads, whereas your standard vehicles have steel brakes that are replaced every so often once they start to wear down. Now the con is one brake rotor costs about $6,000 in the event that you have to replace one, and that's just the rotor. That's not a caliper, that's not pads, that's nothing. That's just the brake rotor itself is $6,000. But as I mentioned, with just normal use, the rotors themselves should outlast the car. For this particular car, how I found out is because after I bought the car, I requested the original build list from the first Bentley dealership that got this car when it came into the country, which was actually Bentley of Atlanta. Though I bought this car from a dealership in Atlanta, it was not a Bentley dealership, it was an exotic car dealership in that area. And once I saw the option, that's when I saw that it had it. One of my biggest concerns was, with inspection, I'm not really sure how it works, but thankfully, the rotors had like a min value on them as far as wear, and they were in great shape with no signs of going out anytime soon, which is great because, I mean, 12 grand for two front rotors is a bit excessive. To be honest with you, it's not something that I would prefer to do, just because I would rather, the cost difference between steel rotors and carbon ceramics is substantial. I mean, steel rotors, for these cars should maybe be around $300–400 each, whereas, one of these carbon ceramics is $6,000, which is definitely mind-blowing to me. But it is what it is. I think that it's definitely appropriate for this car. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a big GT car, right? So it weighs about 5,100 pounds, which is as much as SUVs weigh, and then also under the hood you have a 6.0 liter W12 twin turbo. So it's a heavy car that can go fast, so I mean it would be appropriate to have a really good braking system that can handle that and stop on a dime. It is an all-wheel drive vehicle, and it is definitely very comfortable to drive in any weather conditions. I'm really weary about driving in the snow and the rain, but I actually got stuck in a storm with this car, driving it to a friend's house. An unexpected storm passed through, and it was a really big storm, and normally I get nervous, but in this car it's so solid and heavy that I felt really comfortable in it. So pretty much that is, the car. As far as options, I mean, it does have heated seats, it has soft closing doors, but nothing that's really considered advanced, especially considering that this is, 14 years old at this point, almost 15 years old. But, I guess some of the features that I could highlight is that, it has the soft closing doors, which is where you kind of just lightly, shut the door. You don't have to slam it shut, just lightly shut the door, and it'll pull it in and seal it properly. And then it also has, has a really nice sound system. I'd say one of my favorite features of this car is the air controls. So you can actually pull this knob all the way out if you want all the air to come out, and then as you start pushing it in, it starts closing in the vent. So just kind of little details like that really make it feel special and unique. Another repair that I did is I had the headliner repaired. So if you're ever looking into these earlier model Bentley GTs, one common thing that you may notice is that the headliner starts sagging. And as I started looking into these cars, I realized that this was a common issue because everyone that I looked at had sagging headliners. And the reason why it's a common issue is there is foam on the headliner material, and like an adhesive, foam adhesive that holds it to the headliner. And over time, the foam breaks down, and that causes it to sag. So I took it to a professional upholstery shop that I've used in the past, and pretty much they disassembled everything, got the headliner out, removed all the old adhesive, applied new adhesive, and put it back up. Now it's good as new. And it's really nice because you don't have some cheap, inexpensive material in there. It's the factory Bentley quality leather that the car came with. I did start to notice kind of like a clunking noise on the front right side of the car. Took it to my local independent shop again, and they had determined that it was one of the lower control arms. The rubber part had started to dry rot. So I ended up ordering the part, and then I dropped the car off to them. I also had a set of ghost lowering links because I wanted the car to sit a little bit lower than it was. One of the really cool things about this car is it does have air suspension, so lowering it is a lot easier compared to a traditional car that has, you know, shocks and struts, right? So shock and strut suspensions, say you spend, you know, $300 on springs, you also have to pay for labor or do it yourself to take apart the strut assembly and replace the spring and everything, or remove the whole assembly. Whereas with these cars, it's very simple. So, and it's relatively inexpensive too. So cars with air suspension have a ride height sensor that's fixed, and when you buy the ghost lowering links, they're adjustable and essentially tricks the computer into thinking it's sitting at a certain ride height when it's actually lower. And what's really nice about that is, one, they're super easy to install, and two, you still get to retain the factory air suspension settings. I believe I've lowered a couple cars with air suspension in the past that I've had, like, you know, old S55 AMG, E55 AMG, or 958 Cayenne Turbo. We were all able to lower them with the links. I do believe that there are like computers and ways that you can lower it going that way, like, you know, the Volkswagen Audi system I'm sure would, you know, possibly work with this, like the VAGCOM system. But, you know, unless I absolutely have to go into the ECU and to alter something, I'd rather just leave that alone. And like I said, it's relatively inexpensive. I want to say it's a couple $100 for the lowering links, and you're able to adjust it and get it to sit where you want it. So I dropped those off to the shop so they could replace the lower control arm, so they could do the lowering links, and then obviously when you start altering the suspension, you should do a wheel alignment. So I had a wheel alignment done at that time. So once all of those things were addressed, overall the car is very solid mechanically, so it didn't really need anything. So that's when I was able to kind of switch my focus to the aesthetics of the car, which those of you who follow the channel know that that is my favorite, and that is probably the most important thing to me is aesthetics, right? I love changing the look of the car to something that, you know, no one's really seen before. So Bentley had a lot of chrome trim on this car, and I'm not normally a chrome guy, but I feel like if there's any car that can pull off chrome, it's going to be a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce. So with this car, it did have a lot of chrome. So around the windows here, that was chrome. The door handle trim was chrome. The lower part of the car, that was all chrome. And then also on the front of the car, the upper center grille was chrome, and the lower grills were also chrome. And I did drive it like that for about a month or so, and I thought it looked great. But if I were to leave the car stock, I think that I would have left everything chrome. But because, you know, I started to modify it, that's when I knew I really wanted to do the black look. So how that started is I was talking to a friend of mine who owns a wrap shop in Annapolis, and we had talked about blacking out all the chrome on the side of the car. So again, trim around the windows, door handle, lower part of the car. And after seeing that, that's when I knew this is definitely the route I wanted to go, especially because I knew that I was going to be installing the Maxton design kit as well. So the next step that I did was I disassembled the front grille assembly, and basically the upper grille, I removed the front bumper and actually removed the grills out of there as well, the lower grills. And there are also rings around each headlight that was chrome, and I had those all painted gloss black at the same time. I did consider painting the wings, the spurs, but I thought that it added a good amount of contrast to the car, especially because, you know, the housings of the headlights are chrome, so I thought that that definitely made the spurs pop out even more once I blacked out the chrome grills and the rings. So after doing that, I also blacked out the side markers. Finally, the Maxed In Design kit came shortly after that. The Maxed In Design kit is made to order. It's made in Poland, and it took about 45 days to get here in the States. And the kit entails a front lip, side skirt extensions, a rear diffuser, rear side splitters, and a lip wing. And from the factory, well, from Maxed In Design, you can get it in a gloss black finish. So it's really nice. What's really nice is when you get it, you can kind of just put it on the car, since this paint is just gloss black, and it doesn't stand out as much as like the Aston, for example. For those of you who remember my last Aston, I also had a full Maxed In Design kit on that as well. But that black, the black paint on that car was black onyx, which had a lot of metallic flake. So even though the black blended in well with it, it's not as well as this, just because, you know, this doesn't have any gloss or any metallic flake or anything like that. So pretty much after that, I thought that the car sat really well. I mean, so at this point, you know, the car was lowered, full Maxed In kit, blacked out grills, and it was still on the Mulliner wheels. And while the Mulliner wheels look really good on that car, I definitely wanted to change it into something that stands out. And that's when I found these wheels. They are 20-inch HRE 945R 3-piece wheels. Now, to be honest with you, this isn't necessarily my first pick in wheels. The wheels themselves, I don't think are very good looking, but on this specific application, I think it looks great, and I think it just ties kind of the whole look together. So I did kind of go through a interesting experience when getting these wheels. So as I mentioned, they are 20-inch HRE 945Rs. They're 20 by 8.5 in the front, 20 by 10 in the rear, with a 30 offset front and rear. And when I first got it, the face was silver. So I took it to my wheel repair guy and had them refinished in gloss black. Not that I minded the silver, but I thought black would go well with this. And also it had a couple little nicks and stuff on the faces, and I wanted to look a lot better and fix those. So after he refinished them, I thought it was a good opportunity to also, you know, do TPMS sensors, because I was doing new tires on them. I also had to get a custom bracket to get the TPMS sensors to work with these wheels. And probably the biggest headache that I had to deal with is these wheels, these 945Rs, have flush mounted the valve stem is on the inner barrel. So, you know, normally when you go to put air in your tires and everything, the valve stem is usually sticking out on the side, so you can just easily, you know, get it, put air in it, and you're good to go. So with these wheels, my challenge was, so these are 20s, the factory Mulliner wheels are 20s as well. And since this car has carbon ceramic brakes, it has a very big brake caliper. And, you know, when I first put the wheels on the car, you know, I put the car back on the ground, tightened everything up, and went to go take it out for a drive, and didn't even get about a foot until the brake caliper had sheared the inner valve stem right off. And at that point, I really didn't know what the solution was going to be, but after talking to several people online, they had recommended doing a flush mounted valve stem, which is something that I had never heard of until that point. And basically, you know, the old valve stem was sticking out, I want to say about maybe 2 inches out of the barrel, and the flush mounted one doesn't even stick out, you know, a ½ inch, right? So it's very, very flush. And then how that works is you just twist the cap off, and it comes with an adapter that you would screw into it, and then you would put your attachment, you know, to fill it up with air. So it was kind of a debacle that I was not anticipating having to deal with, but it's the nature of the beast, and it is what it is, and I'm super happy with the way that it turned out. So that is pretty much all of the changes that I did. I've had the cars for maybe 3 months at this point, and I started modifying it pretty quickly, and I'm at a point right now to where there's not really anything left for me to change. To talk about, you know, kind of the driving experience, it is an extremely comfortable and smooth riding car. I mean, it's probably the most comfortable and the smoothest riding car that I've ever owned. It's just, you know, these cars were built for luxury. They're built for comfort. I mean, as I mentioned before, it weighs about 5,100 pounds, so they weren't necessarily concerned with, you know, weight reduction or trying to make it lightweight. This is a car that you can jump in and take anywhere in the US and be very comfortable, but still have a very, you know, unique driving experience. You know, taking it around turns and things, you know, it handles well for what it is, but it is still a whole lot of car that, you know, you're trying to move around. It's not a 911, it's not quite as nimble as that, but for a big car, it handles pretty well. I think it shines the most when you're on the highway. As I mentioned, it does have a 6-liter W12 twin turbo that produces 550 horsepower from the factory. When you go wide open throttle, it doesn't throw you back like a V8 or a supercharged V8, but instead it builds almost like a locomotive, right? So once it starts moving, it definitely pulls very hard, especially as you start, you know, opening up all the cylinders and then the twin turbos are spooling up. You know, it pulls very well on the top end, and it does so very smoothly. Like, it's just extremely comfortable. It does not feel like you're going as fast as you are. It feels very planted to the ground. Another one of my favorite features about this car is it does have active aero. So there is a wing in the back that comes up at 100 miles an hour. And then if you get back down to, I believe, 65, it will automatically go back down. Or if you just like the look of the wing up, you can go inside the car and you can press the button that manually raises the wing and just drive around like that, and then obviously make it go back down as well. Otherwise, I mean, I would say that this is a great car. I would highly recommend it. So as I mentioned, this is a 2008 Continental GT. The reason why I chose an 08 is prior to committing to this car, I spoke to actual Bentley owners and I spoke to a service tech at a local Bentley dealership. And earlier model Continental GTs have a known issue to where the vacuum line, there's a vacuum line that can fail. The vacuum line is relatively inexpensive, however, it is located above the transmission, so in order to get to it, the engine has to come out, whereas in 08, it was redesigned, and you can access it through the steering column. So even though it still may be a little bit labor intensive, it's not quite as labor intensive as removing the entire engine. From doing some research online, I think there's some back and forth about some in 06 and 07 that were applicable, but 08 definitely was in the clear. So that's why, you know, when I started looking for Continental GTs, you know, I definitely, you know, made sure that it was at least an 08 before committing to it. So, you know, part of owning these cars, and you know, the purpose of this channel is for me to share my experience if you were to ever, you know, kind of consider one of these cars, just so you can know what to look out for. As I mentioned, the vacuum line thing, I think, is one of the most costly repairs that you could have on these cars. You definitely want to ensure that it's always, you know, that if you're going to be letting the car sit for a while, you want to ensure that you keep it on a battery tender. When the battery gets low, you know, it can cause just random electrical gremlins and things of that nature. But I haven't, thankfully, had really any issues electrical with this car. And overall, it's been very solid, and I would highly recommend this for anyone who just wants a very comfortable, smooth riding GT car.